Alexander Reed never expected his life to take such a dramatic turn. As a young human exchange student, he stood out at the elite Intergalactic Academy, a place where the most powerful and influential families of the galaxy sent their heirs to study. Earth was new to the Galactic Alliance, and human interaction with other species was still in its infancy. Though Earth had joined the interstellar community, humanity was still viewed as a curiosity, a species with potential but far from achieving the sophistication of the older, more advanced civilizations. At the Academy, Alexander found himself surrounded by beings from all corners of the galaxy. Each day was a whirlwind of new faces and languages, each culture more intricate than the last. But despite the Academy's reputation as a melting pot of galactic diplomacy and royal protocol, humans were still considered primitive. Alexander, with his sharp mind and quick wit, caught the attention of some, yet there was always an undercurrent of condescension. The older species regarded Earth as a backwater, an insignificant planet, and even though they were polite, Alexander could feel their skepticism. One of the most imposing figures at the Academy was Princess Lyra of the Zytherian Empire. The Zytherians were one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the galaxy. Their empire stretched across star systems, their technology was far beyond anything humanity had ever conceived, and their royal family commanded fear and respect. Lyra, poised and elegant, embodied all that her empire stood for. She moved through the Academy halls with an air of authority, her presence alone silencing any conversation in her path. Unlike the others, she showed little interest in mocking or undermining Alexander. If anything, she barely acknowledged his existence, as though he were too small a figure to even notice. The Academy was a place where politics and power were as much a part of the curriculum as science and diplomacy. For someone like Alexander, there was an unspoken pressure to prove that humans could stand alongside these alien peers. He worked hard, always seeking to outthink and outmaneuver his classmates in subtle ways, though the odds seemed stacked against him. The aliens he studied with had lifespans that spanned centuries, giving them an inherent advantage in wisdom and experience. Still, Alexander persevered, knowing that one day, he might represent Earth in a more significant role within the Alliance. The school year had passed uneventfully, but whispers of a significant event soon swept through the Academy. A field trip, one that would take the students far from the Academy's safety to the wilds of a distant, dangerous planet. It was meant to be an educational expedition, an experience designed to teach survival skills and deepen their understanding of the galaxy's untamed worlds. But what truly marked this trip as significant was Princess Lyra's inclusion. Wherever the princess went, formality followed. Her status meant extra security, and the eyes of the galaxy would be on her. As preparations for the trip unfolded, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The excitement of his fellow students was tempered by an underlying tension. There were rumors, whispers in the corridors about rebel factions and growing unrest within certain parts of the Zytherian Empire. But none of this was officially acknowledged. The Zytherian royal family had a reputation for iron-fisted control, and dissent was not something publicly discussed. Despite the warnings that seemed to swirl beneath the surface, the trip was given the green light. Alexander, always cautious but curious, made his own quiet preparations. He had learned, through experience, to never fully trust the safety protocols of the Academy. The galaxy was vast, and its dangers were unpredictable. His human instincts for survival had served him well in the past, and he had no intention of relying solely on the alien technology or the Academy's security to protect him. As the day of the trip arrived, Alexander boarded the ship with a sense of foreboding. The other students, particularly those from the more advanced civilizations, seemed relaxed, confident in their technology and superiority. But for Alexander, this was a moment to remain vigilant. He wasn't just representing himself, he was representing humanity, and in the back of his mind, he knew that any failure could reinforce the negative perceptions of his species. Little did he know, this journey would test him in ways he had never imagined. The journey to the distant planet had begun with a mix of excitement and unease. The landscape was unlike anything Alexander had seen before, filled with lush vegetation and strange, alien wildlife that seemed to pulse with life. The students marveled at the world's beauty, but Alexander couldn't shake the tension building in his chest. The air felt thick, the kind of atmosphere that whispered danger just beneath the surface. He stayed alert, watching the treacherous terrain as they ventured deeper into the wilds. The Academy had promised this would be a simple field trip, but there was something unsettling about the silence in the air. As they ventured further, the planet's mysterious atmosphere only grew more foreboding. Exotic creatures moved in the shadows, and the land itself seemed to shift and breathe. But the real danger was waiting. Just as the group reached the heart of the wilderness, an attack came, swift and without warning. Rebel forces, armed with advanced weaponry and cloaked in stealth, descended on them with ruthless precision. It was clear from the start that this wasn't a random assault. Their target was obvious: Princess Lyra. The rebels were not mere criminals or bandits. They were a well-organized faction with one goal: the capture of the Zytherian princess. Chaos erupted as the Academy's security forces scrambled to defend the students. But they were no match for the rebels. One by one, the Academy's guards fell, their defenses overwhelmed by the sheer tactical precision of the ambush. The students, previously confident in their alien technology, now stood paralyzed in fear. They had never faced anything like this, never imagined that their lives could be at such risk. Princess Lyra, too, was caught off guard. Her usual calm and regal demeanor shattered in the face of the threat. She was vulnerable, and everyone knew it. In the midst of the chaos, Alexander's mind raced. His heart pounded, but he remained steady. There was no time to dwell on fear or doubt. Unlike the others, Alexander had learned early in life that survival didn't depend on the best technology or the most advanced weapons. It depended on quick thinking, on reading the environment, and using whatever was available. The others might have dismissed humans as primitive, but that was their mistake. In that moment, it was clear that their reliance on technology had left them helpless. They weren't prepared for this kind of real danger. Alexander scanned the scene, quickly assessing his options. The rebels were closing in on Lyra. He could see their leader barking orders, and it was clear that the princess was their prize. He couldn't let them take her. In his mind, it wasn't just about saving the princess, it was about what would happen if the rebels succeeded. The destabilization of the Zytherian Empire could throw the entire Galactic Alliance into turmoil. There was too much at stake. Using the dense foliage and uneven terrain to his advantage, Alexander moved quietly, unnoticed by the rebels who were focused on the high-profile targets. He knew he had to act fast. The rebels might have the superior firepower, but they didn't know the land like he was learning to. And they certainly didn't expect resistance from a human. Reaching Lyra's side, he pulled her into cover just as a barrage of energy blasts seared the ground where she had stood moments before. She stared at him, wide-eyed, a mixture of disbelief and fear. She had always seen him as an afterthought, a human among far superior species. But now, as Alexander took charge, she realized she had underestimated him, just like everyone else had. He didn't have a weapon, but he had something more important: his survival instincts. The rebels were closing in, and their focus was entirely on securing Lyra. That gave Alexander an edge. He formulated a plan quickly, using the terrain as both a shield and a weapon. He led Lyra through a series of strategic retreats, always staying one step ahead of the rebels. When they came too close, he set off traps, natural hazards in the environment that he'd quickly adapted into makeshift defenses. He used their technology against them, leading them into ambushes where their advanced gear became a liability instead of an advantage. As the fight dragged on, reinforcements from the Academy finally arrived, but by then, Alexander had already ensured Lyra's safety. The rebels were forced to retreat, their mission a failure. In the aftermath, the battlefield was littered with signs of the chaos, but the most striking image was Alexander, standing beside the princess, both of them unscathed. His actions had saved not just Lyra, but possibly the future stability of the Galactic Alliance. And though the immediate danger had passed, Alexander knew this was only the beginning. He had stepped into a much larger conflict, one that would forever change his place in the galaxy. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long, And now, it would have to reckon with the fact that Alexander Reed was not just a survivor, he was a force to be reckoned with. The news of Alexander's heroic actions spread quickly throughout the Galactic Alliance, and it wasn't long before he found himself standing in the grand halls of the Zytherian Empire, face to face with Emperor Thala himself. The Emperor, imposing and majestic, with eyes that held centuries of wisdom, addressed him with a formality that still managed to carry a touch of warmth. The words were carefully chosen, praising Alexander for his bravery and quick thinking. Saving Princess Lyra had not only secured the royal family's gratitude, but also maintained the fragile stability of the galaxy's political order. Yet, even as the Emperor's voice boomed through the ceremonial hall, Alexander couldn't help but feel the weight of unseen tension. There was an edge in the atmosphere, an unspoken undercurrent that hung between the lines of gratitude. The Zytherian court, with its layers of formality and hidden agendas, was not a place of simple emotions. As the courtiers and diplomats watched him, their expressions were too controlled, too carefully masked. He sensed that while many saw him as a hero, others saw something far more complex, a potential disruption to the delicate balance of power. The reward ceremony was grand, as expected of the Zytherian Empire. Every detail was designed to impress and overwhelm. Alexander stood before the Emperor, surrounded by the galaxy's most powerful and influential figures, as the Emperor revealed the reward for his service, an ancient artifact said to be one of the Empire's most prized possessions. Its origins were shrouded in mystery, and while many had speculated on its purpose, only a few truly understood the extent of its significance. The artifact was no simple token of gratitude. As it was placed in Alexander's hands, a strange energy coursed through him, subtle but undeniable. It was as though the object recognized him, as though it had been waiting for this moment. The artifact had an ancient, almost living presence, and Alexander could feel it resonate within him. There was something more at play here than just a reward for his actions. This was no mere gesture of thanks. It was the beginning of something far larger. The moment he touched it, Alexander felt changes stirring within him. His senses sharpened. Suddenly, the world around him became clearer, more vivid. He noticed the smallest details in the room, the slight shift in someone's posture, the whispered conversations that he wouldn't have caught before. His reflexes felt heightened, his body more in tune with the environment. But with these changes came concern. The power was undeniable, but what was it? Why had they chosen to give him this artifact, and what did they expect in return? As the days passed, the effects became even more pronounced. His strength increased, his mind seemed to process information faster, and he moved with an ease that felt almost unnatural. The artifact had unlocked something within him, something that was both exhilarating and terrifying. This wasn't just a gift, it was a transformation. Word of Alexander's newfound abilities spread quickly. Whispers traveled through the Galactic Alliance, and soon, factions that had once dismissed humanity were paying close attention. Some were fascinated, eager to see what might come of this development. But others, particularly those who held power, began to worry. They knew the legends surrounding the artifact, knew that it had the potential to unlock hidden capabilities within species deemed worthy. For centuries, it had remained dormant, its power untapped. And now, it had chosen a human, a species that many still viewed as inferior. Tension grew within the alliance. There were those who saw Alexander as a symbol of potential, proof that humans were capable of far more than anyone had imagined. But there were others who feared what might happen if humans, with their relatively short lifespans and rapid adaptability, gained access to such power. Would this artifact mark the beginning of humanity's rise, a shift in the balance of power within the galaxy? And if so, what consequences would follow? Alexander, caught between admiration and suspicion, found himself navigating a political minefield he had never anticipated. The gratitude of the Zytherian Empire, though genuine, came with strings attached. The artifact had made him a subject of fascination, but also a target of scrutiny. He was no longer just the human exchange student who had saved a princess. He had become a player in a much larger game, one that could change the course of galactic history. With each passing day, the power of the artifact grew more pronounced, And with it, so did the attention on Alexander. He knew he was standing at the edge of something monumental. His actions had earned him a place among the galaxy's elite, but the question remained, what would he do with the power now in his hands, and what would the galaxy do in response? The true nature of the artifact became apparent far quicker than Alexander had anticipated. What had initially seemed like a strange connection, a heightened awareness, soon turned into something far more profound. It was as if his very DNA was being rewritten, subtly but undeniably. The artifact wasn't just an ancient relic, it was a genetic enhancer, a long-forgotten technology of the Zytherian race. Over time, it began to alter him, slowly pushing his physical and mental capabilities beyond anything any human had ever experienced. His strength grew, his reflexes became sharper, his perception more acute. But this transformation came with a sense of inevitability. Once the process began, there was no turning back. He was becoming something new, something other than human. With each passing day, the changes became more pronounced. What started as subtle enhancements soon became undeniable. Alexander could move faster, see farther, think more clearly than he ever had before. But there was a price. The transformation was irreversible, a one-way journey into the unknown. There were moments when he wondered what he was becoming. Was he still human, or was the artifact molding him into something else entirely? And what would the ultimate cost be? Word of his transformation couldn't be contained for long. Rumors spread across the Galactic Alliance, whispers of the human who had unlocked the power of an ancient Zytherian artifact. Factions within the Alliance, many of whom had long viewed humanity with skepticism, began to take notice. Some saw it as a dangerous precedent. If one human could evolve in such a way, what would happen if others followed? Could humanity, with its unpredictable nature, become a threat to the established order of the galaxy? Others, however, saw potential. There were those who believed that humanity's adaptability and resourcefulness made them the perfect candidates for such power. But for the more established and dominant species, this was a threat. The idea that humans, still considered young and inexperienced in galactic affairs, could rise to such prominence, made them uneasy. The balance of power in the galaxy had always been carefully maintained, but now, with Alexander's transformation, the scales were tipping. Amid this growing tension, Princess Lyra approached Alexander in secret. Her usually composed demeanor was gone, replaced by a deep sense of urgency. She revealed a truth that rocked him to his core. The rebel faction that had attacked them on that distant planet wasn't truly an enemy of the Zytherian Empire. They were part of a secret coup within the royal family itself, a faction that had grown tired of Emperor Thales' increasingly oppressive rule. The kidnapping had been orchestrated by Lyra herself, a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating control of her father's regime. For so long, Lyra had been seen as the dutiful daughter, the perfect embodiment of Zytherian royalty. But behind the scenes, she had been struggling against her father's tyrannical grip on the empire. She had known that the rebels would never harm her, but she had underestimated their power and the danger they posed to the others on the field trip. Now, with Alexander by her side, she found herself in a unique position. He wasn't just a savior, he was someone who could change everything. Lyra confessed her fears, her hopes for the future, and her deep desire to see her people freed from her father's control. She explained that the Zytherian Empire, once a beacon of power and influence, had grown corrupt under her father's reign. The people lived in fear, their freedoms stripped away in the name of security and order. Lyra had wanted to flee, to escape the inevitable role of being a puppet under her father's control, but now she saw an opportunity for something more. She pleaded with Alexander to join her cause, to help her overthrow her father and free her people from the oppression they had lived under for too long. But it wasn't a simple request. Alexander now found himself at a crossroads. His loyalty to the Galactic Alliance had always been clear, but now, with Lyra's revelation, things were far more complicated. If he chose to help her, he would be directly opposing one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. He would be stepping into a civil war that could have far-reaching consequences, not just for the Zytherians but for the entire alliance. The decision weighed heavily on him. On one hand, he knew that Lyra's cause was just. He had seen the cracks in the Zytherian court, the fear behind the politeness, the hidden oppression that no one dared to speak of. But on the other hand, he was still just one human, albeit one with newfound abilities, navigating a galaxy full of political minefields and centuries-old alliances. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. Lyra's eyes held a quiet desperation as she waited for his response. Alexander knew that whatever choice he made, it would not only define his future but also the future of the Zytherian Empire and perhaps even the entire Galactic Alliance. He stood on the precipice of something far larger than himself, caught between loyalty, morality, and the ever-growing power within him. Alexander's mind swirled with the enormity of what lay before him. The transformation happening within him was undeniable. He was no longer the same person who had stepped onto that distant planet. Every day, his abilities grew, pushing him further from the limits of what it meant to be human. The artifact had changed him, but it wasn't just the physical enhancements that weighed on him. His very identity was slipping away, reshaped by forces he couldn't fully comprehend. The simple world he had known as a human exchange student was gone, replaced by a galaxy rife with political intrigue, power struggles, and moral dilemmas that now centered on him. Lyra's plea to help her overthrow her father compounded the pressure. She spoke of freedom and justice, of breaking the chains of tyranny. It was hard to argue with her desire to liberate her people, to end the oppressive rule of her father. But could he truly risk throwing himself into the middle of a civil war? He wasn't just stepping into a personal conflict. This was an empire whose reach spanned entire star systems, an empire whose fall could ripple through the entire Galactic Alliance. The political landscape was a minefield, and Alexander was caught in the middle of it, a pawn being pulled in every direction. Factions within the Alliance were already reacting to his transformation. Some whispered of the potential power he now wielded, seeing him as an asset, a potential game-changer in the galaxy's power structure. Others viewed him with suspicion, seeing only the threat he represented. What if humanity, once thought of as nothing more than a primitive race, began to rise in influence and power? What would stop them from surpassing the older species? The scrutiny on Alexander was relentless. Every move he made, every decision, was watched by those who sought to use him for their own gain or those who feared what he might become. The pressure weighed heavily on his shoulders. The more his abilities grew, the more alien he felt in his own skin. There was no escaping the fact that he was now something other than human. His connection to the artifact had made sure of that. His enhanced strength, his heightened perception, the way his mind processed information, it all set him apart from the people he once called his own. He had to ask himself, what was he becoming, and at what cost? Lyra, sensing his internal struggle, took him aside one evening and revealed the final, shocking truth. The artifact, she explained, wasn't just a genetic enhancer. It had bonded with him on a deeper level, intertwining his very essence with the Zytherian royal bloodline. Whether by design or by fate, Alexander now held a claim to the Zytherian throne. He wasn't just some outsider who had stumbled upon a powerful relic, he had become part of the Empire, linked to its legacy in ways he never imagined. This was the Emperor's shocking reward, a way to ensure that Alexander, with his new abilities, would be tied to the Zytherian Empire for life. The revelation left him reeling. A throne? The responsibility that came with such a position was staggering. But it also felt like a trap. He had saved the princess, and now he was bound to her people in a way that went beyond mere gratitude. The Empire, with all its power and influence, was now part of him, and vice versa. There was no walking away from it. The idea of ruling over a people he barely understood, of being thrust into a position of leadership, was overwhelming. And then there was Lyra. Her plan to overthrow her father had taken on new dimensions. With Alexander now linked to the royal bloodline, he wasn't just her ally, he was someone who could potentially lead the Zytherians into a new era. She pleaded with him again, urging him to take up the mantle, to join her in the fight for a better future. She spoke of the suffering of her people, of the chance they had to reshape their world. But it wasn't that simple. To act against the Emperor was to defy the Galactic Alliance itself, to risk plunging the galaxy into a conflict that could spiral out of control. Alexander stood on the precipice of a decision that would define not just his future, but the future of entire civilizations. If he sided with Lyra, he could bring about a revolution, but at what cost? Could he risk destabilizing the galaxy for the sake of one empire, one people? And if he chose not to act, could he live with himself knowing he had the power to make a difference but chose to stand aside? In the end, the choice wasn't just about politics or power, it was about who he wanted to be. The transformation within him had given him abilities that could change the galaxy, but it had also taken him further from his humanity. The question was whether he could find a way to reconcile the two, to wield the power given to him without losing the core of who he was. He knew that whatever path he chose, there would be no going back. The weight of that decision pressed down on him as the galaxy watched, waiting to see what he would become.